I still am scared of buttons and buttonholes. Hi, my name is Christy. Welcome back to my channel. So I am trying to overcome my fear of buttons and buttonholes, and I know that sounds ridiculous. However, if you've ever used a buttonhole foot on your sewing machine, you know what I'm talking about. I had a traumatic experience the last time I tried this. I'll link that video in the description box below. And I decided to try to combat my fears by trying it again. And you know what? I'm still scared of buttons and buttonholes. They're so scary. The buttonhole foot on your sewing machine, it doesn't work. Does this work for anybody? It works on one layer, and that's it. Any more layers? Not gonna work, not gonna happen. Anyways, I've been wanting to try a cardigan for a long time, and I found this really fun animal print fabric, $8 from Walmart. Again, these $8 finds from Walmart are amazing, and it's great to practice on because it's not expensive. So if you mess it up, you mess it up. I did find a wonderful alternative to the Scary Buttonhole foot, so stay tuned for that. Even though it's already starting to get a little bit warm here, I'm gonna have plenty of uses for this because I'm always cold in my office and I'm always cold in restaurants. Just me? I hope not. Anyways, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Like this video if you're ready. I'm ready. I'm so excited. Thanks so much for being here. Here's my fabric. It is 3 yards of fairly stretchy animal print that I am having way too much fun playing with. And it was another $8 cut from Walmart. So for this project, I'll be using some interfacing, apparently skipping all makeup, and buttons. I'm going back to my tried and true method of patterning after clothes I already have. I have folded both the fabric and the cardigan in half and have lined it up on fold. I've also made sure that the stretchiest part of the fabric is going horizontal across the middle. I'm trying something new and pinning around the edges rather than using fabric chalk. Although I still will need to use the chalk to mark the armhole. I'd like this cardigan to be a little roomier, so I am adding a generous 2-inch seam allowance along the sides. And then taking it down to a 1/2-inch seam allowance for the armhole and shoulder. Look at me trying to think real hard if I pinned at the top of the collar or left room for a collar band. Realizing that I didn't leave room for a band, I am just going to use the top as a built-in seam allowance. Cut it out and I have my back piece. Mostly the same process for the front. The main difference is that it doesn't need to be cut on fold. However, to make sure it's symmetrical, I have folded the cardigan in half front ways. I'm adding another 2 inches on both sides to account for the button placket. And once again going down to the 1/2-inch seam allowance everywhere else. After the seam allowance has been added, cut out the 2 front pieces. The sleeves. Once again, double over the fabric and line the top of the sleeve on fold, and since I have gangly arms, I am going to add additional sleeve length by adding a cuff to the end. And to keep with the roomier feel to this cardigan, I have added some additional room to the sleeve, but still keeping that 1/2-inch seam allowance for the armhole. And then cut out 2 sleeves. It was pretty easy to line up the first sleeve on top of the fabric to make the second sleeve. The cuff measured 2¼ inches that I will double to 4½ inches and add a 1/2-inch seam allowance for 5 in total. After almost losing a battle to keep the fabric on the table, cut 2 cuffs. Finally get to start sewing. With right sides together, line up the shoulder seams and pin to sew. I always like to check first progress, and once it looks good, finish off the raw edges with either a zigzag stitch or on your serger. Pin the long undersides of the sleeves together to sew, and then the same thing, finish off the raw edges. Moving on to the cuffs. Pin the ends together to sew, and you might notice that they look a little smaller, and they are, because I went a little overboard with the roomier feel and they were a bit too baggy, so I scaled them down. Anyways, fold them in half to make the cuff and then press it flat. Line up the cuffs and then flip them to shimmy the cuff over the sleeve to line up the raw edges. And yes, I did have to scale down the sleeves as well to fit the smaller cuffs. Sew the cuff and then add the finishing stitch. So far, so good, and I'm really excited that all of the seams are lining up. A step I could have done earlier but didn't is line up the side seams, sew, and then finish off the raw edges. I've pressed everything towards the back. To attach the sleeves, I have first folded them in half and marked the top of the shoulder with a pin. Then with the sleeve right side out and the bodice wrong side out, more shimmying. Shimmy the sleeve inside so that the right sides are now facing each other. Line up and pin the armpit seam. Next, line up the shoulder pin with the shoulder seam and pin everywhere else. Sew the sleeve in, and I thought I was using a zigzag stitch, but it looks like I am using a straight stitch. Either one will work if it's roomy enough, but to be safe, I would use a zigzag stitch. And then when you're done, finish off those raw edges. For the bottom of the cardigan, I have cut a 4-inch wide strip of fabric and a matching 4-inch wide length of interfacing to match the length of the bottom. This is iron-on fusible interfacing that has a rough side and a smooth side. Flip the fabric so that the wrong side is up and then make sure the rough side of the interfacing is down. To make sure it adheres correctly, spritz a few drops of water and then steam the interfacing on, leaving it in place for just a few seconds. Interfacing is a great way to provide a little bit of structure to a collar, or in this case, the bottom of the cardigan. Double check your work to make sure everything is secure. Fold the band in half and then press the fold. Line up the bottom of the band and flip upwards so that the raw edges are together, pin in place, and then sew with a straight stitch. You guessed it, finish off the raw edges and press upwards. Flip the cardigan so that we can now line up the bias tape for the collar band. I've cut an 1.5 inch wide strip of fabric on the bias, which means cutting on a 45-degree angle. Line up with right sides together and pin to sew. This is absolutely the best way to get a collar to lay flat, even if it means sacrificing some fabric by cutting it on a diagonal. After sewn in place, trim off some of the excess. And then with the seams facing upwards, fold the bias tape over to meet that line of stitching, and then fold over once again to hide all of the raw edges, and pin in place. There should be a little bit of the outside fabric showing on the inside and not vice versa. So very close to that outside edge. And look at this, I finally remembered to add another one of these adorable tags that my mom bought for me. Onto the buttons. I have ironed on a 2-inch wide strip of interfacing to both sides of the front bodice to make the button placket. Then I have ironed in a 1/4 inch to the wrong side so that when you fold it over again to meet the edge of that interfacing, it creates a sturdy and finished edge. Trim any excess and iron that fold. Pin in place, and then sew along the far edge to create a professional finish to the button placket. The buttonholes. I tried to face my fear of my sewing machine's buttonhole foot and failed. So I'm going to fake it with zigzag stitches. I've marked the buttons to be 3 inches apart with chalk. Mark down 3 inches from the top of each button to the next top and 3 inches from the bottom of each button to the next bottom of the button. Basically what you do is fiddle with your machine's zigzag stitch length and sew long stitches in place at the top. Then switch your machine to a shorter width and a longer length. Sew back and forth the right side 3 times. And switch your machine again to the longer width for the in-place stitches at the bottom. Once again, shorten the width and make the length longer to zigzag your way up and down the left side 3 more times. Add a few more long zigzags at the top. And then repeat for all the other buttonholes. Place a pin at the top of the buttonhole and then use your seam ripper to poke down the middle. The pin will prevent you from ripping through those top zigzag stitches. Then double check to make sure that the opening is wide enough to fit the button through. With all the buttonholes now in place, it's time to sew on the buttons. Line up the right side over the left side and then mark with chalk through each buttonhole to show where the button should be sewn on. Unfold the part with the interfacing so that you are sewing on the button to just one layer. This is just a standard way of sewing on a button by poking the needle through the fabric, then through the button, and then back down through the fabric, and repeat several times. Once all of the buttons are sewn on, we can then close up that part with the interfacing. This will very nicely hide all of the stitches from the buttons, and the best way to stitch that interfacing flap down is by hand sewing. First thread your needle and then hide the knot. Pick up a very small portion, just a few threads of the bodice, and then tunnel the needle through the edge of the interfacing. And then once again, pick up just a few stitches of the bodice side and tunnel it again through the interfacing layer. And repeat this the entire way down. Thank you for sewing along with me, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Hit that bell for notifications for all future videos and enjoy the final reveal. And this cardigan is great for those Zoom interviews. Oh, thank you so much for your time. I hope to hear from you soon. Bomb that one.